Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first meeting of the Transportation and the Environment Subcommittee on Appropriations for the 2022 legislative session. I am the chair of the subcommittee, Mark Corman, and pleased to be with you all today. I was going to start by wishing one of our subcommittee mates, Delegate Beitzel, a happy birthday, but we'll have to do it again when he's able to join us. But as long as we're doing positive messages, let me also congratulate our new Acting Transportation Secretary, Jim Ports, who is with us as well. We appreciate having you here and look forward to working with you in this new capacity. Of course, you're no stranger to us as a former deputy and MDTA executive director, but congratulations on your new assignment. The purpose of today's hearing is to discuss commuter rail with the Maryland Transit Administration. Let me just say that there's a really important light rail project in my neck of the woods, the Purple Line, that's been in the news lately, and we will have a separate subcommittee briefing that we're working on scheduling specific to that very important and challenging topic. But the focus today is supposed to be on the commuter rail system, specifically the really well-named Merck train system. Just as and I apologize to the vice chair, that's spelled Merck with a C, but that's just the way it is. The system, as you all know, is three lines: the Brunswick line, the Camden line, and the Penn line. Although the state is responsible for the service, it doesn't own most of the infrastructure. That's owned by CSX or Amtrak, which makes dealing with it quite challenging. The short term, obviously, there's a huge challenge with ridership and the COVID situation that we're still struggling through. But in the long term, there's potentially a lot of opportunity. And we've passed a number of pieces of legislation over the past few years that I think shows the General Assembly's interest on a bipartisan basis in the Merck system, including the Mta Investment Act, some of the funding of which can go towards the Merck train system. That bill also included a requirement for a Western Maryland rail study that I know the MTA was already working on. We passed our colleague who's with us, Delegate Solomon's legislation on run-through service into DC and Virginia. So there was a lot of interest. And we're very lucky today that we're going to get a little bit of a Virginia perspective. As I said, the system is, the lines are really owned by Amtrak and CSX, something Virginia knows very well, and they've had recent experience negotiating with those entities over how to expand and improve their rail service. Although I will say, my Maryland pride here, in some ways we're ahead of Virginia because we have a statewide commuter rail system already, and Virginia's commuter rail is largely focused in Northern Virginia. We also have great opportunities with Amtrak, with the Douglas, formerly BMP tunnel, that I know the administration is working to advance, and the Susquehanna River Bridge project that we can discuss as well. So a lot going on. We're lucky today to be joined, as I said, by our new Acting Transportation Secretary, Jim Ports. Holly Arnold, the relatively new, although maybe not anymore, relative to the Secretary Administrator of the Maryland Transit Administration. Stephen Chan and Joseph Connie, the Chair and Vice Chair of the Merck Riders Advisory Council, and Nicholas Donahue, the former Deputy Secretary of Transportation for Virginia, to provide some of that Virginia experience. Before I turn it over to the Acting Secretary, let me go back to my birthday wishes that he wasn't on to hear. Happy birthday to our colleague Delegate Beitzel, who is on with us now. And do you have a snow report for us, Delegate?
Oh, thanks for the birthday wishes and snow report. It quit snowing, and we probably got 18 inches.
Okay, so more than we have in Bethesda. So with that, let me turn it over to Acting Secretary Ports and his team for their presentation. And perhaps the way we'll do this is we will take the MTA and the Merck Riders Advisory Council, do questions, and then turn to our Virginia perspective. If that works for everybody. Mr. Secretary.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chairman Corman, Vice Chair Krim, and the members of the committee. As was stated, for the record, my name is Jim Ports, Secretary of Maryland Department of Transportation. And I want to thank you for allowing me the opportunity today to be here alongside Administrator Arnold to provide an update on the state's commuter rail service. More importantly, and what you may not know, is I was a former CEO of the Harford County Transit System. So I ran transit for nearly 7 years. I understand the importance and the significant impact that transit has on our citizens. And as we all know, COVID-19 pandemic has demanded flexibility in every industry, including the state's transit system. Despite these challenges, Administrator Arnold and her team, I think, have done a fabulous job. They've been working hard to advance the projects and plans across the state which you'll be hearing about during today's presentation. I want to thank you, Chair Corman, for pointing out all those nuances with the MARC system as far as CSX and Amtrak go. Obviously, you're extremely well informed, and that helps us work together in a much more collaborative effort in trying to move the state forward. So at this point, I'm pleased to turn it over to MDOT MTA Administrator Holly Arnold.
Thanks, Secretary Reports. Hi, good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Krim, and members of the committee. I am going to share my screen if I can remember how to do that on Zoom. All right, can you see that?
Looks perfect.
Okay, cool. Great. So for the record, my name is Holly Arnold. I'm the administrator at MTA. I have with me here today Sean Anderson, our Chief Operating Officer, who is responsible for all of our operating modes, including MARC, and Kate Sylvester, our Deputy Administrator and Chief Planning, Programming, and Engineering Officer, who is overseeing a lot of the planning efforts that we're going to talk about today. So in terms of the agenda, I do want to give just a quick overview of MTA, who we are, what we do. Although Chair Corman stole some of my remarks on Mark there, he's very knowledgeable of our system. An update on the ridership that we're seeing across all of our modes, talk quickly on our progress in terms of meeting our state of good repair goals. And then I will highlight just a few of our upcoming and ongoing projects. I think one thing that's important to remember is, I'm sharing a few of the projects today, but we have a lot of projects ongoing across all of our modes. And so if I don't address something, that doesn't mean there's not work going towards it. It just means that it was not one of the ones that I was highlighting today, but I'm happy to take questions on anything. So just as a reminder, MTA operates Commuter Rail, but we also have 6 modes. So we have our core bus system, light rail, and metro, and mobility paratransit that operate primarily in Baltimore City, MARC and commuter bus that operate statewide. We're the 13th largest transit system in the US by ridership, with about 3,300 employees. Our operating budget is over $900 million, and our capital budget, our 6-year capital budget, is about $4 billion. As Delegate Corman noted, it's important to remember for Mark that we don't own the rails. We're what's called a virtual railroad. So we own the rail cars, we provide the operating, but we don't actually own the rails that we run. So ridership. It's really important that we continue to take a look at where we are with ridership. It's one of our big goals is to bring ridership back to where it was, to the pre-pandemic levels. We're not there yet. Currently overall for all of our different modes, we're still down about 40% compared to 2019 levels. Core bus continues to be the workhorse. This is what agencies across the country are seeing, is that bus is really where people are coming back more than any of the other modes. So for us, for bus, it's down about 30%. Light rail and metro are down 60 and 70%. And then our commuter modes are really kind of the last that are recovering. So they're down about 75%. We did see the increases kind of really start to come up this past September, right around Labor Day. That's when we returned to full service. And we've been hearing from a lot of folks that Labor Day was really their return to office. And so we made sure that our service was there when they were ready to return. So it's been very slow and steady increases for MARC and commuter bus. So state of good repair. There's been a lot of talk on state of good repair at our agency, rightfully so. Across the country, transit agencies have had, not enough funding for state of good repair and have had a state of good repair backlog, and MTA isn't unique in that. So we've been really focusing on our state of good repair investments over the past few years. So between 2019 and 2021, we had over $900 million invested in state of good repair. And the upcoming 2022 to 27 final CTP, which will be out Wednesday, includes more funding, significant investment in every major asset category. Our focus really is getting our system into a state of good repair so that we can continue to provide that safe, reliable service. We've invested quite heavily in our asset management program. So we now know what we own, we know what condition it's in, and we have a team of staff who are able to use that information and data to make our capital funding decisions. We use the data and prioritize state of good repair and safety critical funding needs across the entire agency. We're also bolstered by federal transit relief funding. So we received about $1 billion from the CARES, CRISA, and ARPA acts, which have been reflected in our budget. In 2019, we published the capital needs inventory, which showed a backlog of about 16.2% of our assets. Because of the significant investments that we've made over the past couple of years, we're now down to 14.7%, and we're projected to go even lower with a continued investment and focus on state of good repair. The guideway and facilities ones have dropped the most. We've had some significant track work projects over the past couple of years, and we currently have ongoing and funded Metro railcar and light rail overhaul projects, as well as our Merck 3 railcar overhauls. So we're going to continue to focus on those to reduce the backlogs. And again, the upcoming 2022 CTP includes significant new station investments to address the backlog there. And just as a final note, there will be in July of this year an updated capital needs inventory that will reflect all of the updated spending and needs. So again, I'm going to highlight a few kind of major upcoming and ongoing projects on Merck, and I'm happy to take questions at the end. So one of the first ones I wanted to highlight is our Merck Riverside heavy maintenance building. This project has been a long time coming. When I first started at MTA, we had budgeted funding to purchase our Riverside lot. That finally happened a couple years ago, and we started immediately planning and design for a heavy maintenance building. This is a $64 million facility that we broke ground on in April, and it's going to support major maintenance efforts for Merck. This facility is really going to free up existing shop space so that we can do PMs and repairs. It'll make us more efficient and reduce our downtime for rolling stock. It's also one of the first keys, I mentioned previously that we work with Amtrak quite a bit. And so right now we do rely on them to do the maintenance for our rail cars. And so this facility is kind of the first step to allowing us to take more of that on and rely less on them. Right now we're targeting completion of October of this year. Next is the Frederick Douglass Tunnel. So this project is replacement of the BMP tunnel. So that tunnel is 150 years old. Sometimes you remember it is older than a whole lot of things currently. It's the oldest tunnel that Amtrak inherited, and it's currently the single point of failure on the Penn line for Merck and for the Northeast Corridor. It's the driver of a lot of delays right now. Currently about 10% of our weekday trains are delayed, and delays occur on 99% of weekdays, again, mostly driven by the condition of the BMP tunnel. So the replacement tunnel we're very excited about. It's going to triple capacity. It'll increase travel speeds. It opens up the door for that 30 to 40 minute service between Baltimore and DC. This is an Amtrak project. It's not an MTA one, but we're working very closely with them on design and funding strategy. One other thing it's not on here, but will be a replacement of the West Baltimore Merck station as part of this project. MTA is very excited about that. That station will be new, modern, ADA compliant, and having that on board will be a real centerpiece for the community. So Amtrak has been hosting virtual information kickoff meetings. We're participating in those, and we do want to work closely with Amtrak and the community to ensure that the final product will be good for everyone. Next is Merck station improvements. This has been a big focus over the past couple of years and will continue to be a focus. Our stations are pretty old and need to be brought up into a state of good repair. So one example is the Bwi Station. It was kind of old, dark, not exactly what you wanted as your, hey, welcome to Maryland from the airport station. And so we replaced it. It's been upgraded, really kind of passenger focused, more seating, more lighting, more new restrooms. It does really welcome people to the region much better than the old station did. Laurel Station is also going to be seeing some improvements over the next year or so. We're going to replace the platform, get new decking, stairs, ramps, a substructure, just again, bring that into a state of good repair. And then finally, Odenton Station. So there's really kind of two projects that are happening at Odenton Station at the same time. MTA is focused on renovations to the station, so both interior and exterior, new doors, lighting, HVAC, really kind of bringing it up to where it needs to be. At the same time, Anne Arundel County is going to be building a new parking garage at Odenton Station. And so I think between the station renovations that we're doing and the new parking garage that Anne Arundel County is focused on, it's really going to be a great station to try and bring in transit-oriented development that the county is committed to and the state is committed to. And I'm excited to see what's going to happen there over the next few years. So not all capital projects, but I do also want to talk about some service enhancements that are ongoing and upcoming. One thing that we have heard quite loud and clear is that there's a big desire, I'm sorry, my cat's here, for limited stop service, the joys of working from home. So limited stop service. So we did introduce that fall of 2021. So there's an afternoon train coming back from DC that has a stop at Bwi and a stop at in Baltimore at Penn Station. It's scheduled for 42 minutes. And I think sometimes we've got it under 40 minutes. It's really fast, really reliable. Folks love it. We've heard tons of good feedback on that train. And so we want to continue to explore and see what other opportunities we have for that kind of faster, more reliable service. We work closely with Amtrak, and they've indicated there are no additional train slots available on the Northeast Corridor until the Frederick Douglass Tunnel is complete. But that doesn't mean that we can't play around with the existing schedule. We need to make sure that we're balancing access with that speed and reliability. But our most recent schedule did include more limited stop service, with 3 or 4 stops between Baltimore and DC. And we're going to continue to explore and see what we can come up with there. We welcome feedback from the public, and we've worked very closely with the Merck Riders Advisory Council to get their feedback as well. One thing that's important to note is that we need to make sure that we're coordinating closely with Amtrak to limit service impacts during the track work that's going to happen on the Northeast Corridor. We don't like to introduce service and then immediately have it disrupted from upcoming track work. So we're balancing when we're introducing these things based on when that work is planned. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention some of the commuter rail planning efforts that are ongoing. So there's a lot happening in terms of the planning realm. And it's also really important, especially given the upcoming, the current funding under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, is when we have these things in a plan, that's really the first step to starting to get funding. And so I think these plans are setting us up well for the future. Right now, MTA Merck system is governed by kind of 3 25-year plans. The first is the Merck Cornerstone Plan. We have cornerstone plans for each of the modes that identify what are the capital and service improvements for that mode over the next 25 years. Merck improvements are also included in the Central Maryland Regional Transit Plan that was published fall of 2020, and it includes some of the projects I'm going to talk about shortly. And then finally, there's the State Rail Plan that includes all of the rail in the state, including freight and Merck. And also, we just recently published our 50-year statewide transit plan that includes a number of these Merck efforts that we're currently talking about and we'll talk about, including some expansion for the Merck system. That is out right now as a draft, and we're welcoming public comment through February 18th. So really encourage folks to go to our website, mta.maryland.gov. You can find it available there, provide comments. I think the comments from the public will make it a much stronger plan, and so we really hope that people will do that. And there's some key projects. I'll talk about a few of these shortly that I want to highlight. So Merck VRE run-through service down into Virginia, as well as the extension to Delaware, Newark, Delaware. We have a Brunswick Line master plan that's really taking that cornerstone plan and spelling out each of the individual projects and funding with those that's underway right now. We are looking at transit access in Western Maryland, and we coordinate closely with the Northeast Corridor Commission on their strategic development plan, which has a number of our projects in it. And anything we do on the Northeast Corridor does need to be in that plan before we can move forward with it. And then there's also a number of ongoing kind of train storage and maintenance projects. I talked about Riverside Yard, but we have planning and design underway for the Penn Camden Connector, and construction will be upcoming soon for an expansion of the Martin State Yard. So first, run-through service and closing the gap. This has been an effort that MTA has been pursuing for a number of years. Delegate Solomon's bill 2 sessions ago is something that is part of this. So we're looking at, you can see on the map here, there's a service north to Delaware. There is a gap between where SEPTA comes down to Newark, Delaware, and where we stop at Perryville. So looking at kind of closing that gap, it's currently the only gap on the Northeast Corridor. We have been working closely with the stakeholders in the area. We did some public outreach last year, and we're going to continue that. And right now we're working with DelDOT, SEPTA, PennDOT, and Amtrak on a memorandum of understanding that will outline what service will look like, what capital improvements will be needed, discussing funding. And so that's underway right now. We're continuing to work with them there. It is important to note that before we want to do service north, the Newark Regional Transportation Center needs to be completed. Again, we don't want to introduce service and have to take it away. And so right now, just in order to manage the access at that transportation center, there's only enough for kind of Amtrak and SEPTA service. So once that's complete in 2024, there should be more opportunity for Merck service. But we're continuing to work with them through all the details between now and then. Regarding service south to Virginia, again, the goal is to expand down to Alexandria, and there's a proposed pilot of 2 morning and 2 afternoon trips there. We're working closely again on an MOU with VRE, the Virginia Rail Passenger Administration, CSX, Amtrak, and Norfolk Southern for going south. The one impediment to going south currently is the Long Bridge. So in working with VRPA, they've indicated that there is no additional train slots on Long Bridge until the expansion is completed. So that's a project that Virginia and CSX are working on. And while they're doing that, we're continuing to move forward with negotiations, talking about the other infrastructure improvements that might need to be done, what the funding would look like, what fare collection would look like, scheduling. So we're continuing to push forward, even though at this point in time, it's still going to be several years before we're able to run that for service south. And then finally, the Brunswick Line Master Plan. So the Merck Cornerstone Plan outlines at a pretty high level what some potential projects would be on the Brunswick Line. The master plan is really taking that a step further. So it's taking those service improvements and then really tying them specifically to capital improvements. So if we want to do weekend service, what capital improvements need to happen for that? So we're working closely with CSX. I think this is really the first time that we've actually kind of engaged with CSX at this level and gave them specific service enhancements that we're looking for, and they're going to come back to us with what they're going to require. Again, they own that line. Some of the enhancements that we're looking at include, weekend service in both directions, more rush hour, more midday service, and then potential service to Western Maryland. So that's ongoing now. We anticipate having the draft study out for public comment this year. Again, public comment and feedback makes everything better so we can understand what people are really looking for. And I'll kind of close out just as a reminder, we're focused on improving transit throughout Maryland. We're talking today about Merck, but we do have, 5 other modes that we also continue to focus on and want to make improvements to. Our state of good repair backlog is going to continue and needs to continue to be the priority. But that being said, we are also still focused on making those rider-focused improvements. And as always, we welcome continued dialogue and feedback. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Madam Administrator, and thanks to your cat. As a former daily rider, I'd like to get the rider perspective before we go into questions. So I think that's Mr. Chan and Mr. Connie.
Very good, Chairman. Thank you for the invitation to attend. I have submitted my statement. Would you like me to read it or just make it part of the record and allow you and your colleagues to ask whatever questions you would like?
If you'd like to give a summary, I'm not sure I received it yet, so it might be helpful if you give us a high-level outline.
Very good. Basically, I live in Baltimore County. I ride on the Penn Line. Our council has currently 12 members. Vice Chairman Joe Connie assists me in running the council. We have members from all 3 lines so that we can give the MTA as well as Amtrak and the CSX Railroad guidance, advice, input, feedback on what the riders think. It allows them to float ideas and for us to give them the perspective of riders from all 3 lines. We meet monthly and it's open to the public. Legislature, of course, included. So currently we are running on a pure virtual basis, but we meet every month and all are welcome. And it allows the MTA to give us updates on their plans. Many of these plans have been gone over with the members of the council, as well as allow us to give feedback and input before the public has generally seen the plans. So we very often see these somewhat earlier than the general public, but it allows them to get rider input and tune their plans and recommendations, taking in the opinions of the ridership. And Joe, would you like to put in and give some opinions on your end? I ride on the Penn line. Joe is on the Brunswick line. Joe, go ahead.
Sure. Yes, I've submitted a statement earlier, and if I could, I'd just like to read it. I don't know if the members here have read it. Maybe it's just easier if I read it myself, and you can get an idea of some personal feelings about Mark here. So again, my name is Joe Connie, and I'm the vice chair of the Mark Riders Advisory Council. I've been a resident of Frederick, Maryland since 1991, and now I recently retired from the National Institute of Standards and Technology in Gaithersburg. So I had worked there since 1991, and since about 2008 or so, or until just prior to the pandemic, I was a daily commuter on Mark's Brunswick line from downtown Frederick. Now, I've also used MTA's commuter buses to travel from Frederick to the Shady Grove Metro Station, where NIST had a shuttle bus. So I'm quite familiar with the mass transit commuting modes in Maryland now. However, let me just tell you that I prefer commuting by Mark. And this is not only because travel by train is more comfortable, let's say, than by bus. I've felt for a long time that Mark allows me to reliably reach my destination on time. So as with commuting by car in Vanpool, now the 5:15 commuter bus from Frederick, it can be, of course, delayed by traffic congestion. Now, let me just digress a little bit and say that maybe traffic congestion by cars is going down a bit because of the pandemic and the telecommuting, but there is a lot of heavy truck traffic going south on I-270 during the morning commute, and that is probably going to stay the same or perhaps increase. I know I've heard last year that the truck traffic on the U.S. highways is going up. So let me go on. As I have said many times to colleagues, I could never be sure when driving 270 if I was to reach work within 40 minutes or an hour and 40 minutes. And so the stress of being late to work and possibly missing an important morning meeting was to me unacceptable. And like I say, I feel that Mark allows me to reach my destination more reliably. So let me just say, I believe it's beneficial for the subcommittee to hear from both Steve and I, because we have different experiences commuting on Mark. Steve rides the Penn line and operates, which is operated, of course, by Amtrak, and he takes it into Union Station. So he's therefore familiar with issues of concern to riders on the Penn line going directly into DC, okay? So since I ride the Brunswick line, which is operated now by Alstom, I'm familiar with issues of concern to riders on the Brunswick line who travel to points prior to Silver Spring and Union Station. So there are some issues that we deal with when we're stopping at places, getting off at places before the end of the line. Let's say the stations at Metropolitan Grove, Gaithersburg, and Rockville are the most likely destinations for Brunswick line commuters who don't go to the end of the line. Now, for example, Rockville is an important transfer point to catch a metro into Bethesda for folks working there, because as we know that Mark does not really serve Bethesda. I knew someone from Frederick who actually did this, and she jumped on Metro at Rockville because she worked in downtown Bethesda. So let me point out now that along with Frederick City, the outlying stations of the Brunswick line serve smaller Frederick County communities. And these might be, these would be Walkersville, Middletown, Jefferson, Buckystown, and the city of Brunswick. The Brunswick line also serves eastern Washington County, where residents of places like Sharpsburg and Boonesboro can easily drive to the Brunswick station. Now, as we know, with stations in Martinsburg, Duffield, Harpers Ferry, Merck serves the many riders from West Virginia. But also, I need to point out that riders from Pennsylvania also ride Merck. In fact, I had a colleague at NIST who drove from Gettysburg to ride Merck from Frederick down to Gettysburg. And to him, this was preferable to driving 270. I'd like to make one further point. There are many riders on the Brunswick line, and perhaps this is the case on the other lines too. But many riders from the Brunswick line, from the outlying stations in Frederick and Washington counties and in West Virginia, they're not office workers in, for example, places like Silver Spring and DC. Among my fellow commuters to Gaithersburg, going to NIST, were maintenance and cafeteria workers at NIST. A few of them didn't even drive. In fact, among the 20 or so daily commuters to NIST prior to the pandemic, at least half of these folks, were the maintenance and cafeteria workers. So with that, I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, and I'll be happy to answer your questions along with Steve Chan. Thank you.
Thank you very much for offering the rider perspective. Colleagues, we can use the raise hand function if you have questions for MTA or the Riders Advisory Council. And while people are doing that, let me also thank Ken and Cherie for staffing the hearing. I should have done that up top, and I apologize for missing you. And with that, let me turn it over to the Vice Chair, Vice Chair Krim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as full disclosure, Mr. Connie is a constituent, and I know Mr. Connie. So let me ask maybe Mr. Chan, I think you are a co-chair. Can you tell me a little bit about the advisory council? Like, do you get fairly good attendance at your meeting?
We get variable attendance depending on time of year. Being that we are now virtual, attendance is better. It offers more opportunity for people to attend. Yes. Is attendance perfect? Of course not.
Yeah. So do you know who appoints you? I assume you do. Who appoints you?
Very good. We apply and the management of MTA decides who will be on the council.
And how long is your term?
2 years. And then we typically, they do another head count, see who wants to stay on the council. Our full membership is 15 members. Currently, we are 12 because people do drop out when they move out from the area. Our previous chair moved down to Richmond, Virginia, works for Apple Computer Corporation. We've had members move to Virginia and elsewhere, as well as some find other employment that no longer requires some ARC train. So membership changes at that point as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Administrator Arnold, I see you just went out. Okay. I'm going to start with you if you don't mind. I want to, of course, concentrate on the Brunswick service because that is, and we've talked before and I get updates. So what are the state of negotiations with CSX about expanding service on the Brunswick line?
So we're working closely now with CSX to evaluate the different service parameters on the Brunswick line as part of that Brunswick line master plan. That's something that we got the ability to do in our current access agreement with CSX, that we included that they need to do modeling if we ask them to. And so they've been working closely with us on that. The idea, again, is to get it into the plan first, and then we go for the funding from there.
Oh, okay, so how often do you meet with CSX representatives?
I mean, we are talking with CSX pretty much all the time, specifically on the Brunswick line. we gave them the parameters and we're now currently waiting for them to get back with us.
Okay, so whenever, I guess a couple years ago, I met with some members of your staff now, and we talked about expanding service on the Brunswick line and what may be needed. They indicated a maintenance facility in Brunswick may be something that is needed for CSX. And if we put the maintenance facility there, maybe they would consider expanding service, because how much is that? I mean, I see the one that you're building, I think up in Baltimore County, is 65 million. So how much would that maintenance facility be in Brunswick?
So I may ask Kate to chime in here. So CSX has indicated that they would previously that they would like to have a Brunswick facility a maintenance facility in Brunswick. We do currently have one there, and we've offered to purchase it from them. But last I checked, I don't think they were interested in that. So CSX kind of has gone back and forth about what they're looking for from us specifically there. Kate, can you chime in on this?
Yes, took me a minute to find my mute. Sorry about that. So I agree with what Holly was saying. Our expectation is that the Brunswick line maintenance facility that we need to build is smaller, and it wouldn't need the heavy maintenance functions and equipment that we're building at Riverside. So it shouldn't be as expensive as Riverside. It should be quite a bit less than that. But we haven't done enough design work to have a really solid cost estimate. So I think Riverside's a good example, and knowing that it's smaller kind of gives us the ballpark of where we are, but we don't really have a design-based cost estimate to work with yet. And we need to work out some of those details that Holly was talking about with CSX of what that facility really needs to be.
I wonder if you could provide to me your best estimate on what that facility would cost, and confer with CSX. Could you do that?
Yeah, we can absolutely do that. Well, it'll definitely be a rough order of magnitude cost. I want to be careful. Any costs that we have right now that aren't based on design, may have to change later once we actually get into the design.
Okay. And when I did that site visit at Point of Rocks, and this has been part of our conversation in expanding service on the Brunswick line, was building an overpass over the tracks, so we could add an extra service during the day, because then we could pick up a train that's going to Frederick at the Point of Rock station. So, and that was cost prohibitive, as I recall. So how much is that? Because that's an easy way to expand service. If you could just put up the steps like I was talking about, that would go over the tracks.
I'm gonna have to follow up with you on that. I don't have a specific cost for that.
I need that. Okay, I would need for you to do that as soon as possible. Next thing is West Virginia paying us yet? I knew that there was a problem with getting a reimbursement from West Virginia. How's that going?
We are in ongoing negotiations currently with West Virginia. So I don't have anything to report at this point. We're continuing to provide service, and the lines of communication are open.
I'm not sure I know what that means. So how long have they owed us money?
They paid for the service in FY21. So we're currently working with them on FY22 service, and we have a request. They have amounts that they've provided so far. I don't have an answer specifically on how much they're going to pay us, because we're continuing to negotiate with them for that.
Well, I'm a little confused about that, because doesn't the service cost X amount of money, and then that's what they should be paying us? Why is there a negotiation?
So we've requested 2.2 million, I think is the number. I can get you the exact amount. I believe they have appropriated about 700,000. And so we are continuing to work with them to try and get them to pay the 2.2 million.
And that's how much it costs to reimburse us. I mean, we're not making any money on this, right? We're just trying to get the cost of the service back. Is that
Correct. Yes, that's
that
what it
correct?
costs. That's what it costs us to run the service.
Okay? So is there any discussion about cutting off the service if they don't pay us what is owed to us?
We've had those discussions in the past. At this point, we're continuing to discuss moving forward. We don't want to reduce service. I think it's a valuable service to Marylanders to provide that service into West Virginia. And so we're going to continue working with them and see if they can come up with the additional funding.
Okay. Now let me talk a little bit about what Mr. Connie was talking about, and that was the commuter bus and how he chooses Mark over commuter bus and the reliability. So I have talked about the Bus on Shoulders program for a very long time. And of course, what that means is that the commuter bus bypasses traffic congestion by using the shoulder. So it's a bus on shoulder plan. So I've not gotten anywhere with working with the department. So I have a bill in this year. It's not a mandate, but what it does is it puts the program on the books, because I've talked to legislators who don't even know what it is. And I think it does put the program out there and it to be considered. And, it goes to right to what Mr. Connie's talking about, reliability. I mean, who can use commuter bus if they have to pick their kids up at daycare at a certain time, or, have to take care of their children at a certain time? I mean, you just need to have that. So, the whole idea is we're trying to get people back on transit. I think we have to show them how transit works for them. So, Mr. Chairman, I know I've taken a lot of time, so I will lower my hand.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for letting me be an interloper on another subcommittee. It's always good to be here with you all, and appreciate your support and Delegate Krim's support on a lot of the Merck issues that we've worked on over the last couple of years. Administrator Arnold, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here, and I appreciate your work with us over the last year, and Secretary Ports, welcome and congratulations on your new role as well. I had a couple of questions, particularly on the run-through report, obviously slightly parochial on the bill that I introduced, and then just had a question on sort of the infrastructure, but wanted to just make a quick comment. I mean, I think the graph that you showed around sort of the drop in ridership and the changing commuter patterns that we're seeing as a result of the pandemic, I think only really highlights that we need to think of Mark as more than just a commuter rail, that it shouldn't just be, the morning and the evening to get people to and from, quote unquote population centers where there's work, but it's really more of a tool to connect the state, all times of the day, all days of the week, for leisure, for access to affordable housing. I also wanted to say, I appreciated Delegate Krim's comments on the Brunswick line, and appreciate the work that you and your team spent with us over the summer with Delegate Corman and myself on the letter that we had sent, and sort of working through some of the nuts and bolts. The one thing that I guess I didn't really hear and just kind of wanted to hammer home is, as we've talked about run through, I think it's often in the context of the Penn line, and I think run through service on the Brunswick line, not only for Delegate Krim's constituents up in Frederick, but, folks in Montgomery County, making sure as we see the, ever-growing biotech corridor is connected to the tech jobs in Northern Virginia, and that we don't think of run-through as just, the Penn line connecting Baltimore to Northern Virginia, but it's also connecting Montgomery County and Frederick and points further west with Northern Virginia. And I know that that's going to require a lot of advocacy and work with the folks at Union Station as we think about redoing that area and making sure they've got slots. But I think our vision for run through is that it's run through on all the lines: Camden, Penn, and Brunswick. So I wanted to just ask a couple of questions specifically on the run through report, and appreciate that you all sent that to us last week in advance of today's briefing. And I guess, to be honest with you, I was a little disappointed. I think when we imagined the bill, it was prior to a global pandemic. But I think many of us were hoping to see sort of more immediate actionable steps or actual movement, or even, part of the reason we wrote the pilot piece in there was that I think we always feel like we're talking a lot about upgrades and service, but we don't really see it. And so we really wanted to show to the public that we're making progress that this isn't just, something 5 or 10 years down the road. There's an actual train that's running somewhere new or additional service that's been added. So I guess the first question that I had is, a lot of the pieces on sort of status updates and negotiations were a little bit open-ended, and in a lot of the pieces it said, on the Virginia, looked like the last meeting, at least according to the report that you all had with VRPA, was in July. There was another meeting that happened in September. So that's already 4 months, 4 to 6 months passed. And so I was wondering if you could give us a little bit more of an update on the status of the negotiations, particularly with Virginia, and maybe what's being negotiated. They're just there's a lot of kind of vague language in there about negotiations are ongoing, we're having conversations, and was hoping maybe you could fill in what's happened, in those 4 months prior and what is actually being negotiated at this point.
Sure, yeah. And also to your earlier point, we are looking at run-through service on all 3 lines. So I apologize if I indicated it was just the Penn line. I think it is important for all 3. So yeah, we are continuing to meet with them, having regular meetings with primarily VRPA. They're the new authority that is kind of overseeing passenger rail in Virginia. So again, I will say, I wish I could say right now, like, hey, we're going to have pilot service starting next year. The issue is really the train slots available on Long Bridge. And again, Virginia and CSX are telling us that there are no slots available. So things that we're looking at currently are what other infrastructure, right? So that is one piece of it, but as you mentioned, Union Station. So working closely with Amtrak to ensure that the improvements that they're making at Union Station allow for run-through service on all 3 lines. We're starting to have the early discussions in terms of fare payment. I mean, that's something that could potentially happen earlier than run-through is that kind of joint fare payment. So you don't have to have different mechanisms to do that. We have mobile fare payment. Our new system, fare collection system, will be kind of open fare payment. And so having those conversations with Virginia to ensure that we're coordinating there. Starting to, maybe talk a little bit about what operations might look like. It's a little premature because we just don't know what they're going to be doing in the next few years. And then ensuring as well that, positive train control will be interoperable and kind of those details there. I can't get specifics about, what they're asking and what we're asking, but, we are pushing pretty hard that this is a priority for Maryland and we want to make it happen. And so we just want to make sure that when Long Bridge is done, that we're ready to go.
And I apologize if I'm having issues with my audio. It may just be the laptop that I'm on. And then I had a question also specifically about the Delaware piece. And I'm hoping Secretary reports that you're really interested in this. I know from Harford County, we know this is has been a top priority for Hartford for a long time. So again, I think there were a lot of pieces in there that I think look like we're making progress. And I guess I had questions, specifically a question about sort of one specific piece. So in the report, it says that, partners may not be amenable to adding MARC trains during that time, to your reference on the Newark Transportation Center. So I guess specifically on that, are they amenable, or is that still an open-ended question? And then there was a piece in there about maybe running the train to Wilmington instead.
So essentially, during construction, right? Like anytime you're doing construction on a transit facility, it always gets kind of complicated to make sure that we still provide access to riders. And adding additional trains to that Newark Transportation Center while they're doing the construction is something that they're not interested in. That makes it, we're 2024, we're not that far away. And so again, we're continuing to work with Amtrak. I would say the largest, most complicated piece there is positive train control. There's different versions of positive train control. And so Norfolk Southern is the one who owns the kind of PTC that we would need to tap into there. And so we need to ensure that they will allow us to do that, what they're going to charge us to do that. And so that's something that we're currently investigating and working with Norfolk Southern on. It's not, unheard of. We do that in other places on our service, but we just need to start to have those conversations and have an agreement in place with the freight rail there.
Okay. And then in the interest of time, the other sort of specific quote that was in here is, you all write, funding is needed to complete necessary infrastructure improvements to get to that 2024 deadline. So I think it'd be really helpful if you all could send us what those specific infrastructure improvements are, if there needs to be additional funding for it, or we need to figure out ways to get that. And then sort of the last more broad question, which I know is on, I think, a lot of our minds, and you had mentioned, making sure that MTA and MDOT are in a good place to be able to take advantage of, really what is a historic amount of funding from the federal government on rail. One of the concerns I think that I have, and I've shared this with you all before, is that the cornerstone plans and a lot of the plans seem to be just really high level. And, even in Delegate Krim's question and asking specifically for amounts on projects that we may want to think about funding in our own infrastructure and capital budget just within our own state dollars, there's always, well, we've got to make sure we're at 15 or 30% planning so that this is a really serious application. We have a number that we can give you. We know the federal money is going to require the same thing. The DOT is only really going to fund things that are already along, where we've got firm, plans in place. And I guess my question is, what is MDOT and MTA, and this is either for you or for Secretary Ports, what are you all prioritizing, at least right now, for potential federal applications from the new infrastructure bill? Where are we in getting the design funding and getting the designs and plans actually in place to be able to apply for those grants? And again, what are sort of our top priorities for the federal money going forward?
So Holly, maybe I'll take the first part about the federal prioritization of the monies. So obviously, when we talk to legislators, you all have priorities, governor has priorities, and what we need to do is make sure that we're working together to solve some of those issues and make sure that we're funding the projects appropriately. I can only tell you what my perspective is going to be moving forward. As you mentioned, the federal government is going to want projects that can be done quickly. Now, saying that, they have not appropriated the funds yet, and they haven't given us the regulations for the projects yet. So all that's in a flux. However, as I mentioned, I think an important part of how we look at the regional and statewide issues for funding with this unprecedented money is to look at the local priorities from each jurisdiction. As you know, in the CTP, they have every jurisdiction has to give us their funding priorities starting April 1st. That's when the letters are due. And of course, we have previous ones, and they don't change a lot. So we know about what the local funding options are. These are projects that many times have been in the works, have been designed, may have been planned. And so we're gonna look very hard at the local jurisdictions and where their funding needs are, because look, you all know your house better than we do. You don't want us making all those decisions for you, and so we need to work in a collaborative effort to get that going. And again, I know we're going to have certain timelines, not just to when we receive the funds and when we say the projects are going to start, but how we allocate and spend that funding. And we're going to have, I'm sure, we're going to have deadlines for that. So we do need to work closely together on some of these priorities. I'll flip it over to Holly to talk specifically about the MTA funding, because as you know, we get some MTA funding, we get some airport funding, and we get some highway funding, and all that has been designated at certain amounts by the federal government. Holly, you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Secretary Ports. So specifically funds from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that we're looking at are the BMP tunnel. That has to be our number one priority, right? We take most people on the Penn line. It is a single point of failure. And so working closely with Amtrak on that. We're talking about partnering on a Fed state partnership grant, and we're working closely with them there. Design is underway for that project, and I anticipate that we should hopefully have funding agreement within the next year. Other priorities include electric locomotives or dual mode locomotives that we will need to operate in the tunnel because it's going to be electric only. And so design is underway for that project now. So again, we can be ready to take advantage of funding. Train storage, as I mentioned previously, is always going to be a priority. We need places to put the trains, especially if we're expanding. And so we have design underway for the Penn Camden connector, which will allow us to open up additional storage in Baltimore. The fourth track, the BWI fourth track, so it would be between Odenton and Halethorpe. It's an older project that we are kind of reimagining with Amtrak to see if there's a different way to do it. We've recently, with Amtrak, requested that be included in the Northeast Corridor Commission C35 plan, which is the key in order to have funding available for anything on the Penn line. And so design will start there. And then finally, continued station focus on state of good repair and access at stations. There still are some stations on the Brunswick and the Camden line that are not ADA accessible. And so that needs to be a priority for us. You know, it's been 30 years since ADA passed. And so we have to prioritize on those customer improvements there.
I appreciate the answer. I guess the only comment I would make is, I think where a lot of us were hoping, again, on these sort of once in a generation opportunities from the feds, that we're thinking for sort of a once in a generation change in some of what we've been doing. I mean, not that these projects aren't important, but things like the third rail on the Brunswick line or a fourth track on the on the Penn line to really revolutionize services, things that are in the billions, that are sort of transformative projects for the federal government that may not be in sort of one county or another's specific funding priority, but are really critical to the state. I think those are the kind of projects, and that's the kind of stuff that's in the Cornerstone plan. And so I think we're hoping that we can see that advance in design so that in the next year or so, after the regs and the feds are ready to get the money out, that we're able to take advantage of it. But appreciate the answer, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time.
Thank you, Delegate Solomon. Vice Chair Krim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Secretary Ports said something that I needed to ask a question on. Secretary, you said you're going to look at the priority letters when you are determining how to spend the money. And I would suggest to you that those letters were written before I think the locals knew that there was going to be this extraordinary opportunity with infrastructure. So there may be something that we need to have at the local level that we thought was cost prohibitive, but maybe not so much now. Mm-hmm. So have you thought about that, or are you just going to stick with the letters at this time?
No, so let me go back just a little bit, because I didn't explain the whole CTP process, obviously, but trying to keep the time, minimized. But when we take the CTP, we're looking at the overall state needs. Okay, so if there's statewide needs, obviously they rise to a higher level. Then we look at regional needs, and a lot of times you'll find the local letters will be included. Projects will be included in several localities. So obviously that creates a regional need. And so we look at those priorities. You are correct. That is a possible once in a lifetime opportunity here. But many of these projects have been a priority for decades in many of these localities and I would say regions. And so a lot of these projects, even though it's a local project, does have regional and statewide impact. For example, like if I said the 90 Street Bridge in Ocean City, that absolutely has statewide impact. Most people in the state use that to get to Ocean City. So we look at all these things. Now, I will say that, again, the money has not been appropriated. Everybody thinks, they know how big the pot is. We're not really sure yet. And so it would be very dangerous to say we're going to do this or we're going to do that at this point, because we don't know exactly what the funding is going to be. And again, we don't know what the regulations are going to be surrounding these projects. So until we get more information from the federal government, we can't really make a lot of decisions. I'm just trying to give you an idea of some of the things we're looking at. Again, because many of these projects in the CTP are ready to go. They just need a little boost in funding. So, is that the way to go? We're going to take a hard look at it, but we're going to be working with the local governments to find out if that's important. And I mean, I could start naming some, but I don't want to go down that road right now because, again, we don't know how much money we're getting.
Great. Just a reminder, my colleagues, we are having a full committee briefing on the infrastructure bill broadly. Delegate Beitzel.
I'm muted. Doug, Chairman Corman, hope everything's well on your end and with my other colleagues that are on the meeting. I have some questions from Secretary Ports concerning highway revenue.
Delegate Beitzel, let me just stop you right there. Important issue. We're having an infrastructure briefing with the full committee in a couple of days. Why don't we bank that for a topical discussion? I know we have Secretary Ports here. I bet we can convince him to even have a meeting with you to talk about highway user revenue.
Well, all right. So can I follow up with a question about infrastructure funding?
Sure, Delegate.
The question is, since the pandemic and so many people are working virtually and are getting outdoors and coming out in the Western Maryland and the western end part of the state, is there been any consideration given or any thoughts of, or maybe what are the possibilities of getting additional funds from the infrastructure pool of funds for trails, bike trails, and for the primitive trails? And we're just getting a lot of people that are coming outdoors, and a lot of people are spending a whole lot more time over in the area of the state where there are lots of opportunities for people to get outdoors. Has there been any consideration given to exploring additional resources for trails, bike trails, off-road access from the infrastructure funds?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the federal government, normally when they provide funding, they also provide how much you can spend on any additional mode. So they're going to tell us how much highway funds we have, how much in mass transit we have, how much in port security, how much in airport. They're going to designate what funding levels we have in each of these categories for our TBUs, or the modes as people call them. From that, they're also going to determine, or as I mentioned, they're going to tell us what the regulations are surrounding these things. So they will put priorities on certain things. So again, we have not received that yet. So I can't speak specifically to that, other than the fact that we do have many of those projects in our CTP. They are local priorities in some areas, some more than others. And we're going to look at all aspects of transportation as we move forward.
All right. Thank you, Secretary.
Full
Thank you,
committee.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Beitzel. Full committee Vice Chair Schenk.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much to Administrator Arnold for the presentation. I have two questions. First question in regards to the Dorsey Station over in Harris County. Wanted to see if there's any updates at this time on that station.
You mean regarding the Transitory Development project that is there?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have any updates. Kate, do you know, or we may need to follow up?
I think we should follow up on that. I know there was a, so the TOD program is led at MDOT's Office of Real Estate, and MTA coordinates closely with them. There was a public meeting, I want to say in December, leading up to the release of an RFP for that station. I'm not sure, to be honest, if that RFP is out or if it's coming soon, so we can certainly follow up on that.
Okay, great. That would be great. Thank you very much. And the second question is with regards to the light rail station over in Cromwell and also in Linthicum. That's the light rail system from Anne Arundel County to Baltimore County. This is regards to rider safety and station safety. Have there been any concerns of incidents of public safety at any of those stations in the Anne Arundel County portion of the light rail system?
There hasn't been anything recently that has come up in regards to public safety. MTA police do coordinate very closely with Anne Arundel County Police to ensure that the stations are safe. Previously, we've added additional lighting and looked at different options for the crime prevention through environmental design. I'm happy to follow up if there's specific statistics that you're looking for, though.
Thank you very much for the additional investments in those stops with regards to public safety. As a follow-up, if the additional data could be provided on incidents over there, that would be appreciated. The Cromwell and the Linthicum stations. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Let me ask a couple of questions to the administrator before we get to our last speaker, and I'm hoping MTA can hang on to maybe hear some of the experience in Virginia. So first of all, I didn't hear specifically on the timing, Holly, sorry, Madam Administrator, on the modeling from CSX. You had mentioned that you had sent something over to them, but when's sort of the next check-in with them time-wise?
I believe this month we should be anticipating getting something back from them. They're not always timely, but we will continue to follow up and ensure that we get that as soon as we can.
Great. And you mentioned that Amtrak can't give you any more slots until the Douglas Tunnel is done. Obviously, they're looking to the state for some funding for that, although a relatively small amount, thankfully. So has it been made clear that that's contingent on additional slots? I mean, is that being negotiated now before we spend the money, or are we going to spend the money and then say, now we'd like our slots?
Nope, absolutely. We have a whole list of things that we have given them that is contingent on the funding. There should be a 2 kind of phase agreement that we're working on with them that should be finalized, at least the first phase this year.
Great. And I don't want you to get into all the detail now, but I'd appreciate if you could send us the follow-up about what's contained in those agreements. Yep. And then moving further out the line for Amtrak, one of their sort of infrastructure priorities is the Susquehanna River Bridge project, which I don't think I heard you mention. Is there any update on that, any state involvement?
Yeah, so I didn't mention Susquehanna because it doesn't really impact our Merck service unless we go north to Philadelphia, or sorry, to Newark. They have requested state involvement on that. We are still kind of working on what makes the most sense. We've previously been involved. We partnered with them on getting the record of decision for that project. So there is a precedent for that, but I don't have any full report on what that might look like going forward.
Okay. Often when we talk about the MTA budget, we look at all the modes sort of together. What's the Merck system operating budget? If you don't know, I'm happy to take that as a follow-up.
I don't know off the top of my head. Sean, do you know that, or we may need to follow up?
Yeah, no, I don't know off the top. Yeah, it's mostly just. I mean, when you think about the cost, it's all in the access agreements. Very little, yeah, but we'll get the right number too.
Right. Well, there's also a personnel cost or a contractor cost. I mean, depending on the line, right?
Yeah. So there's contract costs at Alstom for the Camden to Brunswick lines and Amtrak for the Penn line.
Yeah. So I think I'd appreciate knowing the Merck specific operating capital budgets, and that can wait till the new budget request comes in, because oftentimes we group all these things together, and that's one of the benefits of our multimodal transportation trust fund, but I think it also sometimes maybe hides some things that aren't as transparent as they could be. And if you don't mind my asking, Madam Administrator, in terms of your time, how much time do you think you spend on Merck versus the other significant priorities under your purview?
Oh man, you're asking for, I don't know that I have a time percentage. It depends on the day, right? So there's sometimes when I spend a lot of time on Merck projects. I'm working very closely with Amtrak on the BNP tunnel negotiations. So I do spend a lot of time on that. Other times, there are emergencies that pop up on our bus system that I need to deal with. I don't know that I have a specific percentage that I can give you.
Okay, you don't have to bill your time in 6-minute increments like I do for part of my life.
I do not, and I'm very glad, because I don't know if I could tell you that.
Well, thank you, Madam Administrator. I hope you can hang on to listen to our next speaker, who is Nick Donahue, the recently former Deputy Secretary of Transportation in Virginia, who can give us some Commonwealth perspective on how they're dealing with some of their passenger rail issues. So, Mr. Donahue, thank you for virtually traveling across the river to join us.
Well, thank you, Chair Corman, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all here this afternoon. Really quick, Ken, could you enable screen sharing so I could throw up my presentation? And while he's doing that, I'm sorry?
Oh, absolutely. You'll be good to go in a minute.
Okay. And while he's saying that, as Chair Corman noted, I am the former Deputy Secretary of Transportation, so I'm here before you all today in my personal capacity. I stopped working for the state last Friday, so anything I say, please don't hold against the Commonwealth of Virginia, because I do not represent them at the moment. So I just wanted to kind of get that out of the way as we move forward. I was asked to come today to talk about the Commonwealth's Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative. Hey, Ken, there's some issue security-wise in my end. I'm going to try and resolve it, but you may need to I'm going to need you to put my thing up. I can't get to come up. I've been
Okay.
asked to come today to talk about the Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative. And I want to start kind of just briefly by like, what is the initiative? Why do we do it? And then some kind of specifics into it. And so, Ken, when you get that up, if you go to slide 2, so like, what is this? It's been in the paper a lot, but I don't think most people actually have a pretty good sense of the specifics of the actual transaction. And so kind of 4, I think, important things to know about it. On an aggregate basis, it's a $3.7 billion initiative with the Commonwealth, CSX, Amtrak, and our commuter rail system, Virginia Railway Express, or VRE, as I'll kind of refer to it, moving forward. In addition to that, what we're doing in the initiative is we're buying about 350 miles of rail right-of-way on 3 different corridors throughout the Commonwealth. So we're buying about half the 95 corridor between Richmond and DC. We're buying the Buckingham Branch corridor, which is that purple one you see on the map that's there that runs from basically Western Virginia parallel to the 64 corridor to just north of Richmond, where it ties back into the 95 corridor. And then we're buying the orange line you see, which is the abandoned S line that runs from Petersburg, Virginia into North Carolina, about 10 miles. That is kind of a critical link for the hopefully future Southeast high-speed rail project there. But again, it is currently an abandoned rail line. In addition to that, there's a lot of track on the purple line and some tracks we're getting in the blue line there. We're going to be building a new publicly owned long bridge next to the existing one. That bridge is for the most part going to be dedicated to passenger and commuter rail service. So we're going to have freight. We'll use the existing bridge, and the new bridge will really be there for Amtrak, VRE, and whatever other services may use it in the future. And then in addition to that, along the 95 corridor, we're starting to build out kind of a dedicated passenger set of tracks there. We are not anywhere close to having that done, but what the initiative will do would build about 37 miles of additional rail along that 95 corridor, trying to, again, get to connected tracks over time. So that's kind of just the what at an extremely high level is in this initiative. So moving kind of on to the why. And there's a lot of reasons why, but I'm going to talk about the reason I think really push this to the forefront of some of the discussions and operations in Virginia. And so we've worked for decades to expand passenger rail service kind of on an incremental basis on the Commonwealth. What pushed us to take this much more dramatic step to invest several $billions kind of in rapid order there to expand rail service? And so if you move to the next slide, I want to walk through some findings that we found in 2019. So we were directed by our assembly to undertake a review of the 95 corridor, looking at the whole road in Virginia, kind of, from the state line to the state line. And one of the things some of the delegates that passed the bill asked for was to look at, well, what would happen to 95 if you added one new lane in each direction from basically just south of Fredericksburg to the Springfield interchange or the mixing bowl? That's about 50 miles kind of distance. We estimate the costs conservatively would be about $12 billion. So not a small price tag there. And if you look at kind of this chart, just to kind of, it's really simple. Once I explain it, kind of like a stoplight. Green's good. Green means you're going the speed limit. As you get to darker shades of red, that's bad. It means you're going much slower. And so you can see here today, 2019, and we were told that the conditions by, to stakeholders, legislators, and other in 2019 on I-95 were essentially not good, and we needed to try and find things to do to improve it. If you look at 2030, it gets worse if we do nothing. And then you can see kind of the right next to that, 2030, if we add a new lane over the whole 50 miles for $12 billion. There's not an error there. If you notice that there's essentially no difference between not adding a lane and adding a lane. So for $12 billion, VDOT's analysis found that the travel speeds on I-95 during rush hour would be essentially the exact same when we finish building it, because we assume it'll take us about 10 years to build one new lane in each direction over a 50-mile stretch of roadway, assuming the Commonwealth had $12 billion in available resources, which it simply did not. And again, you can see in 2040, things just kind of get worse as we move forward. If you go to the next slide, we then said, well, what happens if we had 2 new lanes? We don't know how much that's going to cost. It's going to cost more than $12 billion. We don't have $12 billion. The answer was kind of shocking. It still didn't really get better. So from Stafford County, which is, the kind of southern edge of the DC suburbs north, the travel speeds are essentially the exact same during the morning rush hour if we didn't add a lane. So adding 2 lanes was not going to actually relieve the traffic congestion that we saw along the 95 corridor, even if we could have afforded it, which we simply could not. And so this clearly said to us, as the executives working in Virginia, we had to look at other ways to try and address travel needs along this corridor. And that was really one of the driving impetuses towards moving forward with this rail initiative, which will really, help us expand rail service along the 95 corridor and give more travel choices to Virginia residents and those who are traveling to places in the Commonwealth. On the next slide, I want to just quickly hit some of the goals of this initiative. So quickly, we want more Amtrak service. We want more VRE commuter rail service. In addition to that, really long-term, what this initiative does is it gives us a path to separating passenger and freight traffic. So you guys are really lucky in Maryland that in a lot of places you have some dedicated passenger tracks on the Northeast corridor. We don't have that in Virginia. Every single one of our trains runs on a Class 1 freight railroad. And so we can change that with this initiative. We're going to have enough right of way from Richmond to DC to build out over time a complete 2-track corridor, fully separating passenger and freight. That also helps our port. So today, the 95 corridor is a major freight rail corridor. It helps serve the Port of Virginia. Because of our VRE service and the choke points with Longbridge, basically freight trains in the morning just sit south of Fredericksburg and don't move for the 2.5-hour VRE rush hour. We need more liquidity in our freight rail system to help serve our port, which we've invested over $700 million to essentially 50% increase in capacity over the last 4 years. And we're spending another $300 million to deepen our channel to 55 feet. And so we need more freight capacity. We're also preserving 2 additional lines for future passenger rail service. And as I mentioned, kind of really looking at some of that service into the future into North Carolina, hopefully connecting the Northeast and Southeast rail corridors there to kind of connect those 2, which today don't really have an efficient connection. So next slide, what type of service are we getting? On Amtrak, we're doubling our state-supported service. So the red lines that you see are the existing long distance trains. The blue lines are our existing state-supported routes. And then these dashed lines are the lines that we'll be adding over the 10 years as we build out this infrastructure. So we're going to go from 6 state-supported trains to 12. In addition to that, this initiative allows us to add service to all parts of the state. Any passenger train in the Commonwealth goes across that long bridge. And so we actually spent years kind of educating stakeholders and elected officials throughout the state that if you live in Roanoke, Virginia, and you want more Amtrak service, you have to care about a 2-track bridge on the Potomac River called the Long Bridge, because every train from Roanoke goes across the Long Bridge. And the reason there's only 1 train in Roanoke today is the Long Bridge. The exact same thing is true in Norfolk, Virginia, and in Newport News, Virginia, and in Charlottesville, Virginia. So I've spent a lot of time talking about the 95 corridor, but this actually opened up service throughout the state. And since we've done this deal, we have actually executed other agreements with Norfolk Southern to expand service out into Western Virginia. And so we're getting more service throughout the entire state because of this initiative. Next slide. On the commuter rail side here, we are increasing the commuter rail service on the Fredericksburg line, which is again the 95 corridor. We have 8 trains today. We'll be adding 5 additional round trips as a part of this. Really importantly, we'll also be adding weekend service. I used to live in the DC area, and we were always jealous of the Merck weekend service because you guys on the Penn line had great service. And if you looked at the VRE system, there was simply none. That's going to change once we complete phase 1 of this initiative. We're also opening up an enabling service on the Manassas line, which is kind of our east-west commuter rail line, if you will. And so again, very, very significant increases in service. Next slide. And so what this map shows you is really looking at that separating passenger and freight. The blue tracks you see on this map are tracks that exist today. The green and red tracks are tracks that we're going to be building as a part of this initiative. When we're done with this initiative from Alexandria North, there will be 2 dedicated passenger only tracks. So the first part of kind of this separating freight and passenger rail will become a reality with the investments we already have planned and programmed. We're going to keep building out the third track south down to Fredericksburg, but clearly additional investments will be needed to more fully build out and separate the passenger and freight service. But we've already pre-negotiated with CSX the track separations and a host of other kind of important criteria that will allow us to by right go in and make those investments, and also have talked about the types of service that Virginia will be able to unlock from a slot perspective when they choose to make those investments into the future. Next slide. So how are we paying for this? $3.7 billion is not a small amount of money. So there are a number of funding sources that are being used to help advance this. I want to start with Amtrak because they're investing almost $1 billion into this initiative. And I just want to be very direct. Their partnership was critical to the Commonwealth being able to get this initiative over the finish line. Without those funds, I don't know how we would have finished the funding plan, to be honest with you. We also have around $900 million in both bonds and pay-as-you-go revenues from the I-66 inside the Beltway express lanes. That's that 10-mile stretch of I-66 from the Capitol Beltway that runs essentially next to the Kennedy Center is where it ends at Constitution Avenue. We have $200 million from our commuter rail service. They're selling bonds and also providing ongoing funds. And then we have also state revenues from the Commonwealth Rail Fund, as well as other flexible dollars that our transportation board controls. And then finally, we're going to be very aggressively seeking those discretionary federal grants. Longbridge was recently accepted into the core capacity program with the Federal Transit Administration, and we're looking to get, give or take, $800 million out of that program. We're also very interested in pursuing the Fed-State Partnership for Intercity Rail, which was the about $12 billion for non-Northeast corridor rail expansions that was included in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And then the last source that's under consideration is looking at selling ticket revenue bonds backed by kind of the ridership on these trains. Next slide. We also, as a part of this, established a passenger rail authority in 2020. This rail authority is the actual owner of all of this real estate. They are the ones who contract with VRE and Amtrak to run all of this service. It has a 12-member board, and it receives about $160 million annually from the Commonwealth Transportation Fund to help make investments, to help essentially advance this initiative, pay for the operations of trains and other things of that nature. And I should note that one of the purposes of creating this authority was to, deal with liability and a variety of other issues, but it was also to ensure that when these assets were purchased, they were then put in an authority that was stable, and the assets couldn't be unloaded essentially at the whims of any administration moving forward. Something we know in the Commonwealth, and it's kind of painful. Virginia used to actually own a plurality share of the RF&P or 95 rail corridor, and it was sold by the Commonwealth in 1991 to CSX. And so we kind of had to actually come back and buy half of it back from them about 30 years later. And so we want to make sure in the future that when those decisions are made, there's a high hurdle to kind of make them moving forward. And then my final slide here, and Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions at the end of this. Why were we able to kind of move forward? So this is something we put together in about a 3-year period from the beginning of negotiations to execution of the definitive agreements, which is over 1,000 pages long. We've been negotiating with the Class 1 railroads for over a decade. So we actually created a fund to invest in freight rail projects in 2005. We've been working with them since then. We started doing passenger rail service with them since in 2009. In our General Assembly, passenger rail is not something that's a partisan issue. We have strong support on both sides of the aisle to help expand and invest in passenger rail service. Our first passenger rail fund was actually created under Republican Governor Bob McDonnell. And so again, just really strong support regardless of which party was in control or who controlled the purse strings. When we approached CSX, we knew what we wanted to accomplish and why. Those 95 charts are just frankly kind of scary to me when you look at how little widening the road will do to improve travel speeds. And then also our transaction with CSX was really structured as a win-win. So again, we're buying half the rail corridor. And at the end of the day, if we're successful, all the VRE and Amtrak trains will get off of their tracks and will now be on tracks that we own. That's good for us and it's good for them because our trains don't have to deal with their trains and their trains don't have to deal with ours. And it wasn't that somebody lost something in this transaction. We both had a way to get what we wanted without the other party really kind of losing or seeing as if they were suffering a loss. And then lastly, we were really lucky to have a variety of funding sources available at the state level that we could use to help support a project of this magnitude, in addition to kind of our partnership with Amtrak, which again, without which we would not have been able to move forward with the initiative. So that concludes my remarks, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you this afternoon.
Thank you so much for that that tutorial on all this. It's very fascinating. Let me ask a question. I don't know if any of my colleagues have questions they want to raise their hands, but let me ask a little about the funding. So first of all, I mean, just to be clear, you use road tolls and cross-subsidize for transit in Virginia now?
Mr. Chair Corman, yes, that is correct. On our express lanes network, a core philosophy of the McAuliffe and Northam administrations was that those toll revenues should help support essentially other investments to move more people through that corridor. And so on I-66, we actually have an agreement with the regional kind of transit authority where those revenues are provided to them and they can invest those in projects that help us move more people through the 66 corridor.
Got it. And you know, your financial plan had some dollar amounts, but not all the dollar amounts. And you mentioned the sort of $12 billion trade-off for the road expansion that wouldn't do anything. It was general purpose toll lanes or general purpose lanes. That'd be part of the reason why. But so what's the total cost of this, at least as you were measuring against the 12 billion?
3.7.
Got it. Thank
So
you.
about a third.
Thank you. Delegate Solomon?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Nick, really appreciate you being here. I often look at the almost regular headlines that Virginia keeps making on rail expansion with Envy. So congratulations, and thank you for your service. I guess just sort of an overall, well, sort of a two-part question. I guess one would be, you know, what was the Northam administration's, I guess, view, or where were things on the conversation on run-through service? Connecting VRE and Merck and getting VRE, you know, I think we view it more than just Merck, right? We want Merck to go to Northern Virginia, but we also want VRE to be able to connect up through, you know, into Baltimore and into on the Brunswick line. And then I guess the second part of the question is, you know, I think what you outlined on the agreement with CSX on purchasing right of way to be able to give separate space for passenger rail and freight rail, I think is really what we'd like to see on the Brunswick line. And you know, obviously it's not directly applicable with freight on Penn, but certainly on Camden. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about how you all were able to bridge those gaps with CSX, because I think we hear a lot in Maryland that CSX is just, you know, sort of this immovable object. And I think MTA has made a lot of progress with them recently, but how do we get to a place similar to what you all have done?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, Delegate Solomon. So on the run-through service, I think Virginia is very interested in having those discussions with Maryland. Look, the DC region is one region. You know, we have three independent jurisdictions there, Maryland, DC, and the Commonwealth. And I think the more we can all do to work together to provide those connections across those jurisdictional boundaries is absolutely in our interest. As Administrator Arnold noted earlier, the Commonwealth was very focused until April of this year, or excuse me, 2021, on getting those definitive agreements executed. And so I will state that on our side, we were a bit preoccupied for an extended period of time. Now those agreements are executed, you know, we're going to move forward with all of those projects. And I think the Commonwealth, you know, at least I can say under the North administration, the Commonwealth was interested in advancing kind of those discussions. There's a lot of work that will need to happen before any kind of meaningful amount of service could take place, because again, the Long Bridge is a huge bottleneck. You know, we're going to have 4 tracks on the Virginia side. There's 4 tracks in DC. It's the prototypical definition of a long bridge, of a bottleneck. But, you know, I know under the North administration, we did have discussions with MTA, and we were certainly interested in exploring those opportunities. On the CSX side, like, how did we get there? I think it was a variety of things. One, we were kind of constantly engaging CSX to explore opportunities with them. So this initiative actually all grew out of a federal discretionary grant we received in 2016 So kind of the precursor to this large tranche of federal grants we have was the fast lane or infra grants that were created in 2015. We actually received $165 million at that time for a $1.4 billion initiative, about $500 million of which was rail infrastructure related, including kind of initial designs for the Long Bridge. We had a lot of discussions with CSX about that, and they were a partner in that grant. And eventually CSX kind of said, well, we want more. We just don't want you to kind of keep building tracks we have to maintain forever. We're not really sure this is in our interest. What do you guys think about buying right of way? And I think, when we went down to Jacksonville of March of 2018 and they started pitching us on this idea, I don't think they thought we were going to say yes and we'll take it all. But that's actually eventually what we did do. A lot of discussions, a lot of back and forth. People walked out of the rooms. We said, a whole host of negotiations and other things, but eventually we found a concept that really worked for us and worked for them. The railroads have a lot of really unique arrangements that particularly I do most of my work on highways. So a lot of their liability provisions and other things of that nature, kind of felt alien at first as we were starting to negotiate with them, but, we stuck with it. And we're able to kind of get through there. But, this started in 2016. In 2018, it started morphing into kind of something bigger. And then I think it was 2019 before we ever announced kind of what the whole deal was. And then we had to spend another year and a half after that almost negotiating the very, very specific terms. So it was a long time coming, but I think it was really impactful and be really meaningful for the Commonwealth.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Donahue. Thank you very much for spending your personal time here and providing this presentation. On your personal reflections, I wonder if we may pivot to the 95 corridor and the highways that you mentioned. Just recently finished a snowstorm here, and I'm thinking about the snowstorm that we had a few weeks ago in the beginning of the year. Are there any personal reflections, lessons learned that you would like to share with us on how we could ever avoid that situation from ever happening again and in Maryland? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Chang, I will do my best, but I want to kind of also just be very clear about the things I worked on and where my expertise is. So they don't let me, I'm not involved at all at snow plowing because they want to make sure it's done efficiently and effectively. So they didn't let me have any say in that. I think we are undertaking I'm no longer involved. VDOT is undertaking a detailed after action report, which will be ready in the next 6 to 8 weeks that are out there. Almost everything on the weather side that could have went wrong did, but that doesn't mean what happened was acceptable. So I think we're going to try and figure out where on our response side things could have been done differently. Cell service was out and power was out. And so I think communications were really challenged because of those two kind of things happening while people were stuck behind kind of jackknife tractor trailer trucks. So I suspect you're going to see things like that, but I have to be very candid. That is pure conjecture on my end. And I think when the after action report is done by those professionals, we will have some good takeaways that we can really look to for the future.
Thank you. Let me just note that in 2016, the Maryland side of the Beltway got totally frozen during a storm, and my aide at the time spent the night on the Beltway. I heard quite a bit about that when I got into the office the next day. So, of course, there's always lessons to be learned, but these things happen on both sides of the river. I do not see any other questions, so I would just like to leave my colleagues and Secretary Ports and Administrator Arnold with the thought that the time is now on investing in infrastructure. The Merck system is younger than me, but older than at least one member of the subcommittee. So it's a little concerning that we have so little in the way of concrete projects that are sort of ready to go to take advantage of this, what you've heard multiple times is a once in a generation infrastructure funding opportunity. So I hope you'll work over the next few months to correct that. Let me also just remind my colleagues that the full committee will be meeting tomorrow for our first bill hearings at 1 p.m. So I will see everybody on the Zoom box then. Thank you again to all of our speakers, Secretary Ports, Administrator Arnold, Mr. Connie, Mr. Chan, and Mr. Donahue. We really appreciate your time as well as the other staff from MTA. And I believe with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all.